been 2.5 years since Roe versus Wade was overturned. What is the pro-life movement doing now? What is the church doing? How can we evangelize the culture and help reach people in crisis pregnancy situations, as well as educate the young people of the next generation? We're with Stuart Hamilton today on Spirit Inspire, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Inspire. I'm your host today, John Soule, and joined with me, as always, is my co-host, Vincent Ricketts. Hello, Vincent. Hey, Vincent. And we have a very special guest today, Mr. Stuart Hamilton, and I've known him for many, many years. He is now the Pro-Life Activities Coordinator for the Archdiocese of Louisville in the Family and Life Ministries office. Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you for having me. This is great. I feel like I finally arrived. I'm on Spirit Inspire. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's awesome.
It's a great gift, and a lot of it came from, many years working and doing media myself with the youth conferences that we've been a part of and other things that we've done. So I'm very blessed to know you, and I mean, I've known you since high school, I think, so
yeah.
If you can believe that.
It's been a while, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, and I know you've been very active in different forms of youth ministry, campus ministry, and other like teaching aspects, especially at Bethlehem High School and other places. And so before we jump into what you're doing now and some of that, we always like to share a little bit of your heart, your faith journey, a little bit of your story to kind of let people know where you're coming from and what got you passionate about what you're called to do within the pro-life movement, especially. So
yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in Washington County, Kentucky. Big family on my dad and mom's side, and they were all Catholic. So I grew up in kind of a cultural Catholicism. But during my teenage years, some of that didn't really trickle down so well. So a lot of people in my generation, I'm 46 years old, I went through a phase where I just kind of rejected the faith and became sort of an angry atheist for through middle school, through my teen years. But God had other plans for me, and He put people in my life that were good Christians. And I actually came to a personal faith in Christ through the Protestant evangelical tradition. Now, this was a great time in my life, actually, because all of my mentors there, none of them were anti-Catholic. They all taught me how to pray and hear God's voice and always be obedient to where God's calling me to go. And so after high school, I went to Bellarmine University, got a degree in theology, and God kept leading me. And I became, I guess, what you would call a revert through a series of circumstances that we could get into, I guess. But I ended up coming back to Catholicism, and thank God for that. While I was at Bellarmine, I was doing campus ministry. I met my now wife, Sarah. She also grew up Catholic. She also found faith in the Protestant evangelical tradition. And through a completely different set of circumstances, she was being led back to the Catholic faith. So when we were both back solidly within the arms of the church, we were married. And I kicked around and did several things after college. I was always involved in some form of youth ministry or campus ministry for various things. But I worked for a long time with Dreams with Wings, which is a local nonprofit that deals with people with developmental disabilities. And I love that job. It was awesome. And I still shout out to them whenever anyone's looking for good service opportunities because they do a great job. But when we started having family members, I decided, I can't really make money at this unless I'm going to move into case development or things like that. And I liked working with people. Mm-hmm. So the discussion was, what are we going to do for a career? And I said, I think I should try my hand at teaching. That's when I went to Bethlehem High School. I became a theology teacher there full time. I also became campus minister eventually. And that's really where I'd always been involved in the pro-life movement, but that's where I really got into pro-life ministry because we started a Respect Life group there. Actually, the person who came to my door and said, I need a sponsor for this group is Tony Cecil, who became Father Tony Cecil.
Oh, wow.
So he came to me, and really the way he said is, we want to go to the March for Life in Washington, D.C., and I need someone to take us. Will you do that? And I said yes, and then I thought, what am I doing? That's a big trip. I've never done anything like that. But we had a long and fruitful ministry there. I was there for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
My wife and I, we lived for a little while out at New Hope, and we were living with the Third Order Dominicans. I did not become a Third Order Dominican, but she was helping them out with some of their pro-life work, including the Ignite Your Torch Youth Conference, which you attended when you were a teenager, and I helped out with that a little bit on the side as well, and took some of my students to Bethlehem to that. And eventually, after 14 years there, we felt the calling to move back to Louisville because all 5 of my children were going to Immaculata Classical Academy, and my wife was working there. So
that was a bit of a drive.
It was a bit of a drive, and it was no longer working for our family situation, but we loved the school. So we prayed about it, and I said, well, if something opens up, we'll see what happens. And Trinity High School had an opening, and I got the job, so now I'm a full-time teacher there. But in addition, I've picked up a part-time job as the pro-life activities coordinator for the Archdiocese. And that is primarily because I was involved in that trip to Washington, D.C. with the March for Life. Ed Harpering, who is a fixture in the pro-life community, he was retiring, and he said, they really need someone to keep this going, and so would you mind trying out for it, seeing how it works? So I've been doing that part-time also, and I think this is my 4th year doing that part-time, working under Deacon Stephen Bowling in the Family and Life Ministry office.
Yeah. How has that the last few years been because a lot has happened in those 4 years too in the pro-life movement?
Yeah, that was, it's so chaotic because that first year we were going to Washington, D.C., and that year, of course, in the summer is when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And then it seemed like everyone was like, oh, geez, what do we do now? And so you're talking to all the pro-life community, the different groups, Kentucky Right to Life, the Sisters for Life, and we're like, what is our mission here in Kentucky? And it became much more local in ministry, like, well, if we're going to have an abortion-free Kentucky, what are the steps to ensure that, including helping women who are in these pregnancy situations, that are emergency pregnancy situations? How do we find a way to minister to them, meet their physical needs and the spiritual needs, and re-educate the populace and so forth and so on? So the ministry has changed quite a bit. And honestly, we're still working on the balance on how to do that, but there are lots of initiatives that are going on right now that are pretty exciting. We started here the Walking with Moms in Need, which is a parish ministry, and that's to mobilize the parishes to do ministry with women who are in need so that they kind of adopt a woman who's in a pregnancy situation. She wants to mother, but she has no idea how to meet her needs, and so we started that. That's one initiative. And another thing that we've been working on is to grow the Kentucky March for Life, to always keep the activism and the prayer portion of what we're doing alive. So there's a lot of things that entails, as well as helping parishes and educating parishes on the breadth of pro-life activity. Because, of course, when you say that the Catholic Church is a pro-life church, we're not just talking about the unborn, we are talking about from conception to natural death. So there's a lot that covers, right? And prioritizing how to minister to people so they see the dignity of human life in all of its stages. That's what we're concerned with.
How do you navigate the complexities of all the different life issues without being either accused of or even falling into the trap of trying to please everyone, cover all the issues, and kind of become, in some ways, wishy-washy, not accomplishing anything because you're trying to accomplish everything?
Yeah, well,
how do you be focused?
Exactly. Well, there's a natural sort of prioritization, right? And that prioritization is not going to be the same in every age. If we were living in the 1700s or something like that, the priority might be slavery or civil rights. Right now, the priority is abortion because of the tremendous loss of human life that still entails in the state of Kentucky. I don't know, I'm sure your viewers know that even though surgical abortions are illegal, chemical abortions can be ordered anonymously across state lines. And we still have 3 border states where abortion is legal. And last year, they keep records on how many Kentucky citizens go get abortions. We actually had more abortions occurring from Kentucky citizens across those state lines than we had before Roe v. Wade was overturned. And this is an incredible statistic.
Wow.
And that's not even counting the mail order abortions. So there's still a lot of work to prioritize that. And I would say that is a number one focus. But then you see naturally within our parishes certain things that crop up that we also need to address. For example, some of the controversies right now when it comes to human rights and immigration. That's very prescient. It's in the news, and it's something that we have to make sure that our parishes are aware of, educated on, and addressing in a way that isn't compatible with church teaching. We also have things like in vitro fertilization, which also has a lot of loss of human life, and not to mention some of the implications for the value of human life and how it should be treated in a lab situation.
Right.
So
not to mention the relationship between the spouses and marriage.
Spouses,
and family.
marriage, human sexuality. And then we have a lot of the emerging problems that face our youth, which the Family Renewal Project has been approaching as well. These are things that affect the parishes more directly, I suppose, right? So there are education components by saying this is in the news, this is something we need to be aware of, these are the legislators. My job is really primarily almost a communication job to get to the parish level and say, okay, ministers, this is what you need to be thinking of because it's in the media, it's in the legislation, and it's stuff that your parishioners are actually struggling with. And that's going to look different. Abortion always, because of the loss of human life, will always be kind of at the top of that list. But as times arise, you have to focus on the other things as well. I don't find that there's a problem with thinning the message out too much. But some of those things are incredibly uncomfortable for ministers to deal with. For example, in vitro fertilization. Not all Catholics are very faithful when it comes to that. Some parishioners are not well educated on that, and they may take that to be a highly politicized thing, even though we're not really dealing with politics.
Right.
They can become political issues in the eyes of our legislators, but for the church, it's all about respecting the dignity of human life.
Well, one of the big challenges with that is the fact that Catholics are going to their doctors, and their doctors, even if they're Catholic doctors, are encouraging it so intensely they don't know of any other options.
Yeah,
right? That's a big deal. So,
That's interesting the way you've been phrasing it, because, both John and I have done pro-life work, and I recall very often. There's all the common sort of arguments against the pro-life position when it comes to abortion that we don't need to rehash. But one of them that is often thrown out there is basically unless you pro-lifer are addressing this issue and this issue and this issue and this issue, then sort of you don't have a right to speak about the issue of abortion.
Yeah.
How do you kind of, you've addressed it a little bit, but can you help me suss at those details a little bit? How does what the Office of Family and Life Ministries and what you do, and also your own experience, how does that all speak to that?
Well, what I've discovered taking on this position really is that the Catholic Church has ministries under their various partnership programs and Catholic charities that, in my opinion, do address every single one of the dignity of life issues. If you talk about the ESL program, for example, helping with immigration, you have homeless programs that help with the homeless. You have prison ministries that help with prisoners. The Catholic Church does actually address in a physical way all of these life ministry issues. So I find that to be more of a distractor. Like a lot of people will say that, but it's like, do you know what the Catholic Church is actually doing to address these issues in real time, whether it's homelessness, drug addiction? Out of the Family and Life Ministry Office, for example, they deal with marriage preparation, but they also deal with getting marriage counselors for people who need it. They also deal with the more controversial subject of people who are hooked on pornography and helping them to find recovery. There's a breadth of ministry there that tries to address each and every one of these issues. It's just, do we make people aware of them at the parish level, and do we get people engaged in them? Which is difficult. It's a challenge. There's a lot to do. You're dealing with an entire culture's misunderstanding of the value of human life. And that's the challenge of it. But in terms of what the church is actually doing, I find that only the Catholic Church actually has the manpower and actually has the substance of ministry to try to deal with each of those issues in kind. Yeah.
Well, and like you alluded to, like all of that, and also there's still a hierarchy of urgency here, right?
Yes.
Like, and so I find that sometimes when I have conversations with people who, I have to assume are well-meaning, but will sort of like put something like immigration or we can take immigration, for example. I mean, there's any of the ones that you just mentioned. But we'll put something like that on the same level of like urgency as abortion.
Yeah.
When there's clearly not, like, we're not dealing with the same level of crisis here.
Yeah.
Or the death penalty, for instance.
The death penalty is another one. Yeah.
Not as many people are being killed by the death penalty in this country as people being aborted, right?
Yes,
And it's not happening as frequently. So, like, the urgency and the impact, how many, as well as how often.
Yeah.
That's critical.
And death penalty is still an issue, of course, because they're also made in the image of God. But you're right.
Correct. Right.
We're talking about the sheer loss of life. There's nothing that compares. There's no human tragedy. There's no war that has taken more lives than abortion has. So that has to be the main message. And sometimes I'll send out a communique that the USCCB puts out that's calling our attention to a particular piece of legislation on abortion. And I'll get emails back saying, well, how come you haven't addressed the death penalty? And I'm like, well, when the USCCB says that, I put things in the newsletter. For example, the Catholic Conference of Kentucky, which is sort of the Catholic Church's mouthpiece in Frankfort in Kentucky, and they try to forward legislation and the cause of the dignity of human life on behalf of the bishops. There is a death penalty issue right now because for a long time there's been a moratorium on the chemical that they use for the death penalty in Kentucky. So relatively speaking, we haven't had anyone executed for a while, but it looks like that moratorium may be ending. And so how do Catholics respond to that? So making sure that the parishes understand, that could be an issue. We might be resuming executions, and we need to support legislators that are working towards a more dignified way of dealing with people who have forgotten the dignity of human life and done a horrible crime. That needs to be put out there too. But I try to communicate what the bishops are communicating. I try to communicate what our bishop is communicating, and I try to prioritize things according to the hierarchy of goods. So I always mention what's going on in abortion in every newsletter. People need to be aware of that so that people are involved in that activity, any activism that we can do, and any prayer that we can do for that. But I also try to hit these other things and try to send things out that the bishops want us to send and say, we need to address this. It's not something that we can pick and choose. This is not a cafeteria style apologize for that. It's not cafeteria style. We have to have an idea here, and we have to prioritize, you know.
Yeah, I mean, of course. And that statistic that you mentioned a little bit ago about a greater number of Kentucky citizens procuring abortions after the overturning of Roe.
I had not heard that before.
I hadn't heard that before. What do you think accounts for that? And more broadly, that as if you know, and more broadly, where do you think we are in the pro-life movement in Kentucky, nationwide? What are the challenges that we face as it stands today?
Well, I would say this. I don't know if I can directly account for why abortions have gone up. But when Amendment Number 2 came up, and this was not the Amendment Number 2 dealing with education, but before that, there was an effort to make sure there was an amendment to the Constitution to say...
In Kentucky.
In Kentucky. The Kentucky State Constitution to say that there is no constitutional right to abortion in our Constitution. Now, Kentucky did not pass that amendment, but what we found in that is everyone that was involved in trying to promote the amendment, we were being outspent by about $1 million per citizen from the abortion industry. They have a massive bankroll on this. Now, we came the closest to passing such an amendment. It was pretty narrow. And one of my tasks was to go out to the parishes and to explain the amendment, because there was a lot of misinformation about what it actually said, like whether it's going to, say that abortion is illegal. No, it just says there's not a constitutional right to abortion, and that was to solidify that someone could not come back and say, oh, it's my right. Well, we have that court case right now working its way through the court system in Kentucky. A young woman, and she's anonymous, so they're calling her Mary Poe, but she was raped, and she conceived in rape, and she says it's her constitutional right to get an abortion, and that case may become a class action lawsuit to represent all women in Kentucky. And that case is now working its way through the Kentucky Supreme Court. I guess this is a roundabout way of saying the cause of abortion and the dignity of human life has always been one of evangelization. We must take seriously the changing of hearts and minds, and on that, we have some grave challenges. When I was going out and talking about Amendment Number 2, I discovered that there were a lot of people, even well-meaning Catholics, that didn't want to say yes to the amendment because in their mind they bracket off, I don't agree with abortion, but what if my daughter was raped? Or what if this situation happened to a family member? I just don't feel comfortable making choices for them. And it's like, well, these are Catholics. Yeah. But they've bracketed it off in a situation where there's still some part of their heart that can't see, but that child's life has value and dignity, regardless of the circumstance of conception. So that putting the focus not just on Mary Poe's tragedy that she was raped, but also on saying, but her little baby Poe, she did subsequently cross the state line and have an abortion in another state, but the case is going on through. Baby Poe lost his or her life, right? How do we evangelize the culture on that when we are being outspent, 10 million to 1 on getting the message out there and making sure that the message is pure and correct?
It almost seems like the amendment, when it came out, was, right after Roe versus Wade was overturned. And it was like an illustration, evidence of changing a law, overturning a court case is not the only answer. It's helpful.
Yeah.
It moves us in the right direction. But we all knew if Roe versus Wade was overturned tomorrow, would it change people's hearts, their desire? The problem
Yes.
is they desire abortion because of things like contraception or, the lifestyles that people have gotten so accustomed to thinking this is healthy, this is right,
Yes.
this is normal, that makes abortion almost a necessity in their life to maintain that illusion. And so it's hard to reach these people, but yet I know that you're doing, the very beginning stages. I mean, it's like the seed form, mustard seed moments here of what we hope to continue building up so that maybe one day we are out spending because we've converted and brought, healing to a lot of people that have more influence and opportunities to support something once they've seen what our true intentions are. I think, can you speak to like maybe people's perception of why they don't support the pro-life movement, not just because, but I don't want to, prevent someone else mentality, but more like you don't necessarily, you might care about getting the child born, but what about the rest of their life? Why would they want to be born into this terrible situation? A kid who's been raped, they're just a reminder of that tragedy, and obviously that's a very horrific tragedy that even happened to begin with. But, that is a minimal case, like other situations where people justify abortion because I can't bring another child into this terrible world. Like, how do you speak to that despair?
It is, and that's why I said it's an issue of conversion. Now, I'm on the board of Little Way Pregnancy Resource Center, and really the goal of Little Way is to show realistically what the options are to these women come in and they're a wreck. They're beside themselves. They're in a moment of crisis, and the approach is always to love them and help them see their value and see the value of their child in the love that they're receiving. It is an act of evangelization. If they can see the love that exists for them and see that their situation may seem overwhelming, but God loves them and they have help in places like Little Way. And also, Kentucky's been doing a great job in expanding things like Medicare provision and things like that, and ministries like Walking with Moms in Need. There is a way to see through this, but they have to believe first that their life has value, that they are loved, and so their child's life has value. You said it perfectly, that there's sort of a darkness, I think, for every decision of someone who says, well, this child, he's going to have a terrible life. It'd be better for him not to have life. There is a certain nihilism there that doubts in the goodness of life in general, right? The blessedness of the gift of life for themselves, not just the child, right? So it is an act of evangelization. It's an act of loving the people and then showing them the value of life in a holistic way. You do have to provide for the physical needs, right? But I think there are a lot of ministries that actually do that, and helping the women. A lot of women do know that it's a baby and that it's a life inside them, right? It's not just a matter of educating them and showing them the ultrasound. I mean, there are plenty of women that'll see the ultrasound and say, "I don't care." That's the barrier of saying, but what's the value of your life and what's the value of this child's life? Do you feel loved? Once a person feels loved and feel like they have value and they can actually make this decision, they can say yes to life, a heroic decision, that they're capable of that and they're empowered to do that, then they can see forward a whole different path for their life, regardless of what may have brought them to that point of wanting an abortion, right? Because, we know the statistics when it comes to rape. It's something like 2% of abortions nationwide have anything to do with sexual assault. The vast majority of the decisions are made along the lines of saying, it's just not compatible with my life, right? Or citing financial reasons, right? So helping these women realize that their value and then providing for them so they can actually make these choices to be a mother is very, very important. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So much to the complexities of the pro-life movement. And I think one other question, going back to your early days of youth ministry and campus ministry and what got you into the pro-life movement, like how do we educate and empower young people, I think, to be involved nowadays, not just college students, because I know, having been in college and helped start and lead a pro-life group there at Western Kentucky University, I got very involved with Students for Life of America, who's getting well established even back when I was in college, and now they have a national pro-life summit every year. I mean, a massive movement that they've grown. And they're starting, some of the work in high schools and parishes, perhaps in some ways. But what can the church do to, partner alongside groups like that to further reach that generation of young people, not just college students, but younger?
Yeah. Now, here's where I have pretty strong opinions about youth ministry in general. And that is, you can't just speak the words to them. They have to have some experience. We're sacramental beings. We're bodily beings. In all youth ministry, regardless of whether you're talking about Christ and the incarnation and the sacraments or whether you're talking about pro-life values, the most important thing is to invite the kids towards some sort of experience. Now, that could be the March for Life in Washington, D.C. If anyone has ever, from Kentucky, gone on that, that's a pilgrimage. I mean, you're oftentimes driving sleepless through the nights. You go to the Mass for Life at the Basilica, and you're there for hours and hours. And the first year I went, I didn't know whether the kids would rebel on me or what. I didn't know how kids would react to that demanding rigor. And it blew them away. Most of those students went there because they wanted to go to Washington, D.C., and they left there pro-life. They saw suddenly, when I get on the computer, when I get on social media, it seems like no one's pro-life. But then I went to Washington, D.C., and I saw thousands and thousands of people all together. And then they go to something like the summit, and they see all of these different national speakers. For example, they had the guy from the Babylon Bee come and speak, and it validates them. It helps them to know they're connected. It gives them an experience, both prayer and activism, and that makes not only their pro-life convictions real for them, but also their just understanding of Christ and the Catholic Church and what we do to address this, and it validates them in both sides. And I would say that's the same for any pro-life issue. You could talk about the poor, and maybe people love to just give a little money here and there, but if you take them down to the food pantry, Father Jack Ryan Food Pantry with Catholic Charities, and have them actually give food to the poor, that gives them a whole different meaning of, man, these people need help. There are real people in our city that need help. And they need help not just throwing money at it, but go and give my talents to it. And that gives them a whole other experience by which that it's incorporated holistically into their life. Any good teacher of the faith or minister of the faith will always be looking for those experiences. So, for example, funny story, I wasn't going to be able to be here today because we had the Kentucky March for Life, but because of bad weather, they postponed it till February 26th. I'll be taking youth to that. I think it's important once they get there and they say, hey, this is hundreds of youths from all across Kentucky. We're here while the legislators are in session and our voice is being heard. They don't ever forget that. And we're doing this surrounded by prayer. We're going to Mass. It's always prayer and activism combined in some way. Or getting them involved with volunteering at one of the pregnancy resource centers, where they're actually going down and seeing how this ministry works and what it does. I took some Trinity students down to take a tour of Little Way, and they give a little presentation about fetal development. And I had one student that was like, I had no idea. I had no idea. And it's like, and this is a teenager, but he just didn't have any idea. And his eyes were opened, that experience of being down there, and also the combated lie, right? These people are doing a lot to help women, right? There is help out there for these women. And these are children, right? He'll go back, he'll be pro-life. And this also solidifies his relationship with the church, which is inherently a pro-life church, right? So that's what I would always suggest. Whatever you're doing in youth ministry, always try to find an experience that confirms what you're saying by word, right? And sometimes that'll be adoration, a prayer experience, and sometimes it'll be an activist thing, like going and actually helping people. Yeah.
That's so good. That the words you say, the things you teach, have to be backed up through action, and action can be both in a contemplative, receptive environment like prayer, as you said, but also in that initiative, service-oriented experience that is also irreplaceable. It's the Mary Martha integration, not like competition, like people oftentimes say it. Right?
Yes.
It's both and.
Well, we're bodies and we're souls, right? And the church addresses not only our spiritual well-being and not only trying to give you knowledge but about morality and about God, but also the bodily part of it. We are sacramental creatures. God created us this way, and it's a beautiful creation. But if we neglect one for the other, then things can become somewhat imbalanced, I think, in the effectiveness of ministry. I mean, I struggle with this in the classroom. I'm a teacher, full-time teacher. I can't, if my students are watching this, they'll say, wow, he needs to do a little bit more of that in the classroom, because sometimes, you can get into your own head and want to like pontificate a little bit more than you are putting together the lessons that make it incarnational, but that's the goal. That's always the goal. Yeah.
So much to that. There's a lot to the pro-life movement that we have to unpack now that Roe versus Wade is overturned, because I think there's a whole generation of people who had worked so many years with that thinking, in some ways in despair. I don't know if I'll ever see Roe versus Wade overturned. Right? It was hard to believe. Even when I would go to the Students for Life conference, they would talk about one day we're going to overturn Roe versus Wade, and there was still this that's an impossible dream. Right?
Yeah.
But there's something that shifted in the last 10 or 15 years that I think made that feel more like this is actually possible, and people started believing it more.
Yeah.
Since you've not said it, though I thought you would have, recall that Roe versus Wade was overturned on the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Oh, right.
Which was
Hadn't
also,
gotten there yet,
which was the Feast of John the Baptist, but it was, what's the word?
It was replaced.
Not replaced. It's when the greater feast
supersedes.
There's a word for it, but yeah, it was the Feast of John the Baptist, but it was also the Feast of the Sacred Heart, which then that replaced the. Liturgically, that replaced the
But
Feast of
every
John the
year
Baptist.
from now on the Feast of John the Baptist, it's the anniversary of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So the very first person who recognized Christ in the womb, it was his feast day when Roe versus Wade was overturned, which I thought was incredible. Obviously not counting Mother Mary, right, herself. But
John leapt in the womb.
Yeah, John leapt in the womb, and there was grace that filled that, even the child of all of us. So...
we can always learn from this that it's not just merely human effort, right? It is inherently a work of God, right? I always tell kids, like with Abraham, when Abraham was called to go to the promised land and leave everything he'd ever known, he went to the promised land and it was full of Canaanites, and he's like, oh, you're not just going to give me this land. And God said, yeah, I will. You got to wait. And what he did was went all the way around the edge of Canaan, and he built altars and gave sacrifices, and he waited. It was not just his effort that was going to do the thing. But if God calls you to do a thing, even though it seems impossible, you have to just continue working at it. You need to wait, be faithful, pray, do what you can, do the hard work, and God will eventually bring his promises to fruition. So I have a lot of hope in that. Even now, when you look at like how media works and how the media spins things, a lot of lies, there's a lot of misinformation about there. They tried to redirect this and say, well, this is essential medical aid essential health care that if you deny it from women, women will die, right? And sometimes you can get like, man, people really are listening to this, but it is a work of God, and that's our challenge to push back on the misinformation, right?
You know, sometimes I feel this in a particular way, but like I've had to stop myself multiple times during this conversation from taking this down just a purely apologetic rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because
it's a temptation.
Because that's not the focus of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
right? And that would distract. But you know, when you intellectualize the issue of abortion, I mean, I've thought about this. I have had untold numbers of conversations with people who are pro-abortion or pro-choice, and I've yet to find a logically compelling, like philosophically compelling argument for abortion. And on the flip side, it seems like such an obvious like issue. Like if you believe in universal human rights, if you start from that standpoint, it's so clear, and yet it's so divisive at the same time. And I say all that because the temptation is to just beat up on the issue, right? You depersonalize it so it no longer applies to any particular human being.
Yeah.
And then you beat up on the issue, and which is a really it's an easy way to win an argument, and it's also a really easy way to lose souls, and not to mention when applied to particular situations and particular people you're dealing with. It's not just an issue to be kind of discussed over a table, but it is it's a gaping wound, right? That has to be tended to. And so I really appreciate what you were saying there, Stuart, about pro-life, movement or ministry being fundamentally about evangelization, and evangelization being fundamentally not so much about getting somebody else to agree with my formulation of the world or my syllogisms, right? To buy into my arguments, but fundamentally to have somebody else experience the love of Jesus Christ through me as his unworthy vessel. And yeah, I don't know if you could speak to some of that in your experience. Are you ever tempted to over intellectualize it? I mean, I know I am. So, and I think that might be common. And what's your experience then when you actually encounter somebody else and are able to see Christ in them?
Well, I do believe that everything comes down to helping people feel loved no matter what they've done. Help people see the value in their life no matter what they've done. In the issue of abortion in particular, I used to do a little lesson in my classes where I would give I would even have the kids throw questions, anonymous questions, and I would answer them. And I would try to hit every pro-life argument, and then I'd take a survey. How were you before? What did you believe before? It was an anonymous survey, and what do you believe now? And at first, I felt like, I don't think I'm really making a difference here with just these arguments, so I went a different track. I showed had them kind of talk about gratitude in their lives, and I would kind of start the lesson that way. And then I'd show them a video of just a baby in the womb developing. And then I'd show them a video of what abortion actually does. Mm. And then they're like, okay, that changed my mind. I didn't know that the baby would feel anything. I didn't know that the baby would be torn apart. I didn't know this was occurring, And also I think the reflection of just saying, what about yourself? Would you want to live if you were born this way or that way, or asking questions like this. You know, in some of the Scandinavian countries, they've claimed that they've cured, Down syndrome. But what they really did was said you all have to have a test, prenatal test, and if your child has Down syndrome, we're recommending you get an abortion, and this is state health care, and there's a lot going into that, and so they've got like in the 90th percentile abortions of those women who've tested positive for Down syndrome.
And how many of those are prenatally diagnosed incorrectly?
Yeah, of course. Now, it doesn't really matter whether it's correct or incorrect.
Of course. Right.
If you want to change people's minds, you have people say, how many of you in the classroom know someone that has Down syndrome? And they raise their hand. I say, do they seem unhappy with their life? And then, of course, you let them speak to that personal experience of how joy-filled, people with Down syndrome are. Talk about the hugs and the little stories that go along with that. It's absurd to think when you have those personal testimonies, this person, if given the choice, would not want to live, right? But once again, it's things like that to try to move an experience forward where they see the realities and they have some sort of personal contact with it. This can only be done. I mean, I applaud all the efforts of the media groups that are trying to get the news out there. Trent Horn does a great job with Catholic apologetics when it comes to pro-life issues. He has a whole class on it through Catholic Answers that's incredible. But in the end, if you're going to change hearts and minds, it will be one-on-one. Mm-hmm. It will be the evangelical ministry of each individual person who can reach the 2 or 3 individual lives that they are closest to show them radical love and the value of human life for themselves. And when they do that, and when they receive Christ, I think that the value of human life unfolds in an even greater way. And it takes a long time. There's a lot of seeds planted. There's a lot of watering over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And then God's time, that person sees it, I believe. This has just been my experience because I've been in youth ministry for so long, and now people that I knew when they were younger and I didn't know whether I had any impact, coming back around later and saying everything you said was true. This happened, this happened, this happened. I made that choice, then that happened. And it's like, but I kept coming back to certain things you said. When this happens, you got to remember you were created to know, love, and serve God. God loves you. And eventually, those seeds with the experiences that they've had of that one-on-one relationship of love does bear fruit. I believe inherently we're a church of faith, hope, and charity. If we do that correctly, I think we can win this. But we can't be overly reliant on media to do it for us because we're outspent, and we've got to do that more neighbor to neighbor.
Right. Yeah, I mean, 100%. And it does start with in the heart. I mean, there's a reason why I've said this on the show before, but there's a reason why, in the Bright program, the classroom ministry that we do with FRP, and of course the Bright program having its genesis at Little Way, starts right off the bat with "You are a gift." Mm-hmm. And that it's not just the first talking point among many, but is actually the framework in which we operate. Because, speaking about chastity or healthy relationships, or even when we're talking about something hard like abortion, if you leave the framework of "You are a gift," right, which is a kind of a secularized sort of way of saying you were created to know, love, and serve God, and He loves you no matter what you've done and no matter what you will do.
And you have infinite dignity.
And you have infinite worth and dignity. Yeah. Like that actually, and I say that I kind of added this phrasing when I started teaching Bright, but I say if we learn to accept that we are a gift, everything in life makes sense.
Yeah.
Like everything will suddenly it all it makes sense now. But if we don't, if we reject this, if we push it to the side and we refuse to let the fact that we are a gift sink in, then on the opposite end, like nothing will make sense.
It's no different than
all.
saying, I will not serve. And suddenly your life is chaos. It's filled with lies. And that's the lie of Satan, right? This is my body. I'll do with it as I want. Instead of this is my body given for you, I am a gift in total self-donation as Christ did on the cross and in the Eucharist. And I mean, abortion is the exact opposite of the Eucharistic life.
Yeah.
In that sense.
And we're all a gift. If we can help people understand you are a gift to the world, then they can understand everyone is a gift to the world. And some people may lose sight of that, but our heart can lead us to kind of say, okay, if I'm a gift, they're a gift. I need to remind them that they're a gift. You know, what is the thing that they're here to do? You know, our value isn't the work that we do, right? It's what we are, who we are. But that means that the work that we do is something God uniquely placed in us, people that you can reach that I can't reach, people that you can help that I can't help, situations in your life that God called you and gifted you to someone else so that you could bring the love of God into their life. You know, and if you don't do this, it's like blessings can either flow through your life to others, or you can be like a clogged up toilet and the blessings just kind of back right on up. That's the way I kind of think about it.
That's a great image.
You want it to flow. You want the blessings to flow right through you and don't become a clogged pipe and creating all this nastiness in life. But I do believe that a lot of time, even in my own life, where there's places where I haven't been very gracious in giving, those are the pinch points where usually I start having stress and problems, you know, in my life, because God's not being able to work through me and be the gift that my life's meant to be.
It's like becoming channels of living water, right, that flow through you and not sewage.
And not sewage. You don't want to do that. But God, you know, of course, Jesus Christ speaks about this multiple times throughout the scriptures. So that's it. Inherently, if you don't believe God loves you, if you don't believe you're a blessing, if you don't believe your life is a gift to others, how could you possibly view other people's lives that way? Inherently? And that's why it is an evangelism issue, and that's why we have to kind of work with it. I mean, you can do a certain amount with natural law. I think natural law is built in each of us, and we can appeal to some of those sentiments that I believe are buried deep within the, I guess, the culture's sort of brainwashing, right? You can appeal to that a little bit, but I think ultimately the legitimate love of Christ is how you bring the value of human life.
Yeah, it's the relationship between objective truth, which is unchangeable and sovereign, and subjective experience, which can fall into the route of Cartesian worldview of I think, therefore I am. It's whatever I experience in the moment is who I am. That's not what we're saying, though. Subjective experience has everything to do with your real life experience as it rubs up against the actual evidence of objective truth and these unchangeable realities of existence and how we were designed to think and to act and to be. And if we can recognize that those experiences actually help us like connect with God in real ways, in tangible ways, then it's not a dictatorship, it's a recognition of reality. It's an awakening. Like that guy said, I had no idea, and his whole world was changed, right?
Yeah.
It's the same for all of us. Like there's so much that we have no idea what God has in store for us in heaven, but he's giving us glimpses here if only we open our eyes to it.
That's the marriage of Thomism and phenomenology and John Paul II.
Yes.
I want to do an episode on that. Can we do an episode on that?
I think that'd be fun. The marriage of John Paul II's phenomenological personalism and St. Thomas Aquinas' entire school of thought.
His
it was a metaphysical concreteness of human existence versus the phenomenological personalism that John Paul II basically pulled out of, I think, Max Scheler, who was a phenomenologist, but then adjusted to the fullness of the truth in the Catholic Church so it didn't fall into the Cartesian worldview, but helped people really understand there's a relationship between the concrete existence of our bodiliness and all the laws of nature that it follows, and our experience and this human soul and the human dreams and our desires and imaginations and longings, and how that there's a relationship between the two, and they're not at odds with one another, which is what I think the Cartesian worldview oftentimes points us towards. So,
Well, when you talk to youth, and they start asking you questions, and you guys do, right? You know what I'm talking about, questions about what's acceptable outside of marriage and what's not acceptable, and they're always playing this game. And I always say, what do you really want? I mean, what is it that you desire with this? Now, do you want love? Do you want commitment? Do you want someone to really see you as you are and love you and be committed to you? Or is your ultimate goal to feel good for a little while, but have none of those things? I think behind every teenager that wants to make out with their girlfriend or whatever, there is this desire for love, and that they may not be able to name it, but they know on a certain level it's all built up to, I'm meant to give myself sacrificially for someone, they're meant to give themselves sacrificially to me. I think that a lot of young people despair that love exists, that love can be real, and that it's not all a bunch of usury. And it's a particular problem now because of the way social media acts in people's lives. I actually put this under a pro-life concern with young people and the way social media is affecting them, where they're almost scared of people and of having deep relationships. They're scared of that such and such would betray them, maybe take an awkward picture, tell an awkward story, send it out to the world, and then that's what they are as a teenager. There's a lot of complications with this, but there's almost this despair that love can be real, that commitment can be real, that they can make that kind of self-sacrificial commitment. But I'm teaching nothing but young men now in my service at Trinity. I do believe they really want to be self-sacrificial, though. They want to be warriors. They just need to be directed. Their desires, they need to understand what their true desires are, right, in that regard. I really want to lay down my life for something bigger than myself, and I think that speaks to what you're saying. I believe personally that the whole world is a sacrament that can speak the voice of God to us if we're listening properly. If we're hearing it properly, and we're really digging in deep, and we're trying to strip back the layers of social programming, I do believe that God's speaking all the time through the experiences in our life to try to lead us towards Him, towards a better version of ourselves in Him and what we're really meant to be. So helping young people see that and try to resist the social programming it's one of the challenges of youth ministry. It's one of the challenges of working with youth,
And the pro-life movement in every sense of the word, right?
Yes.
That's why FRP was founded, and so many other great organizations exist to do that very thing. There's so much, Stuart, that we could continue talking about. We've kind of run out of time at this point today.
Oh, yeah.
If you can believe it.
we didn't even get into immigration. I was hoping we'd open that can of worms here at the very end.
Just as another episode, Stuart.
Okay,
you're
we
in
can
town
do that.
now.
Come on back.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
that'd
think
be
that
awesome.
honestly
We'll do it.
deserves its own episode. And
Yeah, and we could probably further delve into our experiences with youth ministry too, because I love working with youth. It's challenging but very rewarding.
It is
as well. So yeah, I'd love to come back anytime.
That'd be a great gift.
Yeah.
So anything you want to plug specifically, websites or books or events coming up that you want to share?
Well, the big event I would share right now is going to be the Kentucky March for Life on February 26th. We want everybody to be there. It is very important because the Kentucky legislators, there's a lot of pressure on them to adopt a philosophy that extends abortion rights in a way that is not in keeping with the value of human life. But it's a very big encouragement to them when they see youth show up en masse and saying No, stay strong. Stay strong. We're with you. And encourage them in that. And it's also a way that youth can connect to other youth and have that sacramental experience of just being with each other and seeing that they're not alone. They're not just with them and their two friends, that there are lots of people that agree with them and that believe in what they believe in. It's very encouraging. So that's the one event. The only other thing that I would always say is support your pregnancy resource centers. So Little Way Pregnancy Resource Center, I'll always plug them. They do tremendous work, and they are on the ground of doing the evangelism that we're actually talking about here.
Yeah, they do.
They do miraculous work. So those are the two things I'll throw out there right now. And also just prayer for our president, for our country, and for all of these, the immigrants and the situation that's happening there, that there would be wisdom applied so that human rights can be valued, and the dignity of human life for all of these people would be valued in the way that we're handling that situation, which is on the Holy Father's heart as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, as it should be on all of ours.
Yeah.
You know, it's very important. Well, thank you, Stuart, for being here. It's been a great gift, as always. We talked a lot about that today, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. We're gifts. Thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and thank you all so much for being here on Spirit Inspire. We just ask that you continue to pray for us. Be sure to like and subscribe, of course, and push the gospel out to all the corners of everyone that you know. And we will see you on another episode of Spirit Inspire. God bless you.